Now we're going to move on because we are late and our next speaker is waiting for us. So our next speaker is an internationally known and respected diplomat, Mr. Ambassador Haile Menkerios, who is going to join us by Zoom. So we'll speak on Eritrea international engagement, or maybe lack of it, and how it can improve perhaps in the context but not only of how it has been happening in the country over the years, but also the prevailing issues and in this situation, including the that of what is the situation in what is happening in the Tigray. Ambassador Haile Menkerios served as head of the United Nations Office to the African Union and as the special representative to the African Union at the level of Under-Secretary General from 2013 to 2018. Ambassador Haile previously served as the United Nations Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Sudan and South Sudan at the level of Under-Secretary General. He was the Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs. During the period from 1991 up to 2000, Ambassador Haile was Eritrea's ambassador to Ethiopia, the Organization of African Unity, and a special envoy to Somalia and the African Great Lakes region, and was also Eritrea's permanent representative to the United Nations. Mr. Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure actually to participate in this August meeting, and I am honored actually by that invitation. Let's go straight into the topic I'm asked to speak about, which is foreign policy, the current foreign policy of the country, and also what may be done in preparation for a change of that policy. In Eritrea, the struggle itself was conducted with an absolute centralized military organization. It goes without saying. And external policy is a byproduct, an extension of internal policy, both during the struggle and after the struggle. Therefore, the external policy of the organization was decided in like manner to the way the first the EPLF and then the government of Eritrea run its internal affairs. The struggle was conducted with an absolutely militarized, centralized organization, I had said, and it was based not only on justifiable opposition to the Ethiopian regime, but also anger against the whole world, the world that betrayed Eritrea. While there was support for decolonization of all colonized peoples, Eritrea and Eritreans were sacrificed for imperialist interests. This was the thinking, the mentality. So there was defiance against everybody. Beinomans are hayalat. You probably remember. Defiance against any kinds of international institutions and norms. Internal EPLF policy was decided also in a military style way. The same pattern continued after independence. Both domestic and foreign policy was determined in similar manner by first the party, the political party, first the president, then the party, and then the parliament, and then implementation without question. The parliament simply rubber stamped what was decided in that manner by the president and then the party that he chaired. He was, in fact, the president of the country, of the executive, head of the executive, and also the chairman of the parliament, which was supposed to put a check on the government, but he was the president of both. There was a belief, actually, in Isaias as a person, based on his defiance of everything, anger at everything, of, in other words, confrontation, that you will never get your right unless you engage, unless you confront anybody with whom you have a conflict. With that idea, the policy of Eritrea towards its neighbors was a policy of confrontation. Eritrea then became the only country in the world to have had a conflict, a war with every single one of its neighbors. You remember the Hanish dispute with Yemen, a war started by Eritrea. We remember the problem with Sudan, with Turabi's Islamist, in other words, expansionism to the region. There was a war with Eritrea, with Sudan. And then it was the war with Ethiopia, whose consequence actually continued for a long time, as we know. And then finally, there was a war based on a dispute again with Djibouti. It was based, actually, was said that we had a border dispute with Djibouti, and when we found out that actually there was no basis for that dispute, then the excuse was that Djibouti allowed Ethiopian troops to post their guns in the Jebel Ali mountain when the Ethiopian war started. That was the basis for that war as well. There was a time when Isaias almost ordered fighting against Saudi Arabia. Saudi boats were fishing in Eritrean waters, and Isaias ordered shooting at those boats and sinking them so that they would never do it again. Well, it was lucky that the Saudis withdrew their boats right away before he could do that, but that had been another disaster. Internationally, a sort of a very isolationist policy with no respect to norms and dependence on illicit economic, in other words, policy, illicit trade and economic activity based on control by the party, also a byproduct of that. And therefore, with conflict with every neighbor, and also anger and defiance with the international community, Isaias built actually a rogue government, and every time there was opposition to that internal, he saw every institution, every attempt at an institution, actually, because the was not much of an institution without powers at all. Policy was decided by him, and he became increasingly sort of not even wanting to show semblance in other words, institutional working, and completely eliminated or completely made dysfunction the institutions that were supposed to decide on policy. It was decided just by him. And this is what we've had, up to now. In order to do that, he depended on creating crises. Some crises would then make it acceptable for him to say, look, we are in crisis, no question about, in other words, institutional working. We are in a crisis, and therefore it is controlled actually by the government until this crisis is finished. Well, the border crisis with Ethiopia could have been resolved actually by peaceful means. It had started as such, but he created, there was no way of ending it, like Nigeria ended, for example, its conflict with border conflict with Cameroon peacefully, and then through dialogue. Isaias wouldn't have it, and therefore, if we are to sort of prepare for a new process of defining foreign policy, we definitely have to start with a new process of defining internal policy first. Any policy that is not decided by institutions that are accountable to the people, the constitution, none of which now as a institution or process exists in Eritrea, then we would be dependent on a continuation of that policy. For the first was to improve our foreign policy. We have to improve our means of deciding on any policy in the country. I think right now, the crisis that has been with Ethiopia, and still he is at war with Ethiopia, even if they have decided actually for a cessation hostilities they recently did in the, Isaias wouldn't have it, because if that crisis is resolved, then he would have to be forced then to, okay, where is our constitution? Why isn't that constitution implemented? Why isn't a parliament operating? And therefore, he is continuing the war with Ethiopia, despite the fact that Abiy, the president of Ethiopia, had agreed actually that should be resolved in accordance with what was decided by a legal international process, which is going to arbitration. And he does not want that conflict resolved. It helps him as a pretext, really, to continue his absolutist control and also confrontation with his neighbors until possibly he could control them too. So I would think in right now, where the Eritrean troops are also opposing fighting a war that is resolution of that conflict, that border conflict, denies him the pretext of continuing that fighting, that war. The international community has not really developed a policy towards Eritrea. A policy towards Eritrea would depend on what the government is doing in Eritrea, on what would be, in other words, in the interest of the Eritrean people also, for development, for peace, for their human rights and all that. But there hasn't really been a policy based on conditions in Eritrea, on changing the situation in Eritrea for the Eritrean people. It has always been, Eritrea is supporting, undermining Ethiopia, which is an ally, It is supporting the Shabab, and therefore, what do we do? It is supporting the Houthis. What do we do so that Eritrea doesn't become a threat to international peace? Not that the Eritrean regime becomes a threat to the peace of the Eritrean people. And I think we should, at least right now, remind the international community that the border with Ethiopia, which is the excuse for Isaias to engage in the fight in Ethiopia, has been resolved through a legal international instrument, which they observed, which was considered as, final and binding. And there is no other way to resolve international conflicts except through accepted norms of international law. And therefore, we should ask them to recognize the line so designated by the Eritrea-Ethiopia Commission as the border between, the official border between Eritrea and Ethiopia. That would deny him the pretext that comes of fighting. And then the Eritrean people will say, hey, yes, what do you want then? If our border is defined, if our border is there, then we have no reason to fight in Ethiopia, is what they would say. I will stop right here, and hopefully for the rest of the period for the session, I hope there is some, we can discuss these points that I presented as a start. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for the enlightening make some time, spare us some time from your very, very busy schedule to come and speak in this conference. We really, very much appreciate your work. Now we're going to have.
Wants to take questions.
If he wants to, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Gareth and Dr. Chapman.
Okay.
Do you want to?
So who is first?
I think Gareth was first.
Okay. Ambassador Khair.
Okay. Ambassador Khair, can you unmute and yeah, please unmute.
I'm thinking I'm now muted. You can hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
hear
we
you
can hear you.
clearly.
Okay, maybe for the whole group, just a little bit introduction who I am. I am a former EU ambassador in Eritrea. And when from 2004 to 2006, and when we had a conflict about food deliveries, I had an interview. And in the interview, I also said that we cannot consider Eritrea as a democracy. It's just a dictatorship under Isaias. Well, that was sufficient to start the end of my time in Eritrea. What I hear, one thing is, if I'm rightly, but correct me, when I was in Eritrea, there was always one thing what they said: Eritrea has an excellent constitution, only it was never ratified by Isaias. Yes, I'm wondering, is this constitution, and you talked a little bit about already, what was then, I think, elaborating, what was it, 98, 97 or something? I think, can that be immediately be again, come to the reality, and then anyhow, a kind of official all-state constitution can be the guidance for the further legal developments. Yes. So is this constitution, was that as good as I always heard? And do you think it can easily, in the post-Isaias period, become active again?
So shall we take another question, and so that Ambassador Haile can answer all of them?
Yeah, we go to Dr. Chapman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
You hear me well?
very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, both presenters. I've got two questions. The first one could be directed to anyone, either of them, to Martin Plaut or to Ambassador Haile. And that relates to the mantra that started in the liberation era, relating to the we against the great powers, and or against all odds. And I heard from Martin's talk that this was not the case. I mean, Eritrea had also support from countries which would normally not been acknowledged. So it's not, I mean, the way it's being presented could be different. So in your talk, Mr. Ambassador said that the anger, the kind of defiance, Isaiah's defiance emanates from this fact, the fact that the world ignored us, that it was unfair. So I would just like to know which one is rather more plausible. The second one is about your talk, the last point you raised, Mr. Ambassador, as a recommendation, that the world needs to make sure that the Algiers agreement is put in practice, and that would deny Isaiah from his urge to continue war. Do you think this is going to really deny Isaiah of an excuse, given the fact that he is not going to run out of excuses? He will always be, the very nature of him would not allow him to do that. And also, I have some in my readings from Ambassador Andrew book. You were he refers to you. There's an attribution made that Yamane Gabrab, while you were the ambassador to Ethiopia, talks about the demarcation, and then he says, well, I'm quoting Ambassador Andrew, that you would insist on the settling these problems peacefully, while Yamane tells you that you're obsessed, or something like to that effect. So, do you think, because this is a debate, this is something that really divides the how do you call the?
Can you make it?
Yeah, I'm just winding it up. So I'll stop there. I think I've made my questions clear. I hope that.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Over to you.
Yeah, should be there. Ambassador, you are muted now. Can you unmute?
Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Now you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The first question was, can the Constitution be considered ratified? The Constitution can be considered ratified in that there was a commission that actually consulted with the people and presented the Constitution. That was presented at the Parliament, and the Parliament actually welcomed it. There was no other legal process that was supported, that was supposed to be. It was in a meeting where Isaias was present as well, and therefore it can be considered actually as ratified by the institution that at that time acted as the legal representative of the people, even if it was not elected. So there you go. Number two, this we against everybody. I expressed to that to indicate that there was an anger as a start point. And this is before the struggle. During the struggle, there was this feeling all the time that the international community, meaning actually the powers to be at that time, the US, the West in general, sacrificed us, whereas they were supporting other African colonized countries. Eritrea was not supported. It was to the start of it. the anger began there, not to indicate that there was no support actually from other countries. Definitely there was support, particularly non-governmental organizations from the West, from many areas supported us. Countries also that are not, that is not told actually their support. Syria, Iraq, a lot of the Arab countries are actually surrounding us, supported the struggle, particularly the ELF, but not only the ELF, they supported the TPLF also, Yemen a lot, Sudan, lots of sympathy and facilitation. So there was a lot of support, particularly the humanitarian, as I said, from the West. Demarcation, will demarcation stop Isaias from fighting? No, it would not stop Isaias from wanting to continue the fighting. In fact, he's saying it is not the border anymore. It is not the border, really. It is the nature of this TPLF, which is narrow ethnic, which is a problem actually to every thing we stand for in Ethiopia, in the whole region. This is what he is saying, but that is not what is actually pushing Eritrean youth not to be able to say no actually to fighting up to now. I have asked many Eritrean young people, and I'm here in Sudan, what is the problem actually? Why aren't the Eritrean youth saying no to Isaias? And he said, it is because the majority of these youth are raised with the propaganda that actually the source of every problem in Eritrea is violence. The way or just continue actually, because there is a lot of anger. Just ask the mothers actually in Eritrea, every single one of them. The majority of them, the vast majority of them, let alone actually the common people, even people like Andrew, look, they are saying actually they are the source of our problem and they have to be. If that border was no longer an issue, at least those who have the capacity to change Isaias, to say no to Isaias, would say no. What reason do we have actually to go to fight? In fact, they've started already. We are not fighting outside of our borders. So it is not Isaias, it is the people of Eritrea who would stop him. About Yemane's obsession, yes. I have told Isaias in 1992, before the referendum, why don't, this is the time, the period of decolonization of Eritrea, when we have to define the borders of Eritrea. We should define the borders between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and with the participation of an international legal body. And the next morning, in fact, we were having breakfast with Meles. He just told him actually, Haile says actually we should define the border. And he wants actually even to bring an international body to sort of ascertain this process in a joking type manner. And Mele said, no, third parties actually will create a problem for us rather than, that was a time of the honeymoon, between the TPLF and the EPLF. And they said, why? He said, at least he asked me a question. He said, why do you want the involvement of a third party? I said, because it's a legal process. It's a border, it's a legal process. If the land goes to Eritrea, then people will blame you that you gave up their land actually to Eritrea because you're just obeying the orders of Eritrea. And if it goes to Ethiopia, people will ask you, why did you sell us actually to Ethiopia? At least you could answer that way. And well, they decided at this time, because Meles asked so, it will create problems between us. We should not raise issues that are going to divide us because we are not so sure we, as the TPLF, can control Ethiopia and we need each other and therefore we could wait. And then I asked Isaias, well, you are tasking me as the ambassador of Eritrea in Ethiopia to register all Eritreans in Ethiopia that have to vote in the referendum. Now, do I register those who are from the Badme area or not? What do I do? Now, we leave them out? Is that what you're telling me? Well, I will leave it to your wisdom, but I need a clear answer. That was the end of that issue. It was never raised. Again, when people started actually fighting in the Badme area, this is our land, this is our land. There was a meeting actually of Eritrea and Ethiopia. I raised it there. We have to resolve this issue because we are two countries. We decided to be two countries, and you are asking people on the ground to resolve it actually through means that people in one village in our country or one village in Tigray are supposed to resolve it. They can't do that. It's an international issue. We must resolve it. And then Emmanuel says, you are just worrying us so much with this. It's an obsession for you, this border issue, because he knew I had raised it before with his side. I said, well, if it is an obsession and it is my side that is opposing me, then I will never raise again. But I had to drop it. That was true. I think these were the questions.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We have a few hands raised to ask questions. Can you spare us a few more minutes to answer at least two questions?
Sure.
Okay, sorry. Okay, you can go on.
Put the mic on.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Atv Asena. I've been involved in the border issues as well.
I am sorry, I cannot hear very well. If you could.
Thank you very much for the contribution. Let me come to the question directly. You have been involved personally in giving advice, either through your money or directly to Isaiah. My observation is it has not been going through to the public, at least to the leadership of the area, or the people concerned who they lead, and including you. And this is going on until now. Things are being spoken in the name of Isaiah. For the other one, there has been a leadership, there has been a growth. There is a people now as well. And if things are going to be resolved through Isaiah, I need your consideration, putting yourself as well in that position. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question.
Can I repeat so that I understand the question? That I was, and others are still, even now, talking about issues with Isaiah directly, but not relating them to the institutions that are supposed to deal with them or the public. Is that the question?
Well, it's hard for me to say institutions. There are other than institutions, but you have been yourself saying as well. It's a nominal. So I don't consider that the whole institution. It has been a lower scheme until now. So all yourself in the leadership and the others who have been with you. And now, what does we expect from you and those who are in power or who have been in. So shortly to say, the guardians of the Eritrea. Thank you.
Okay, one more question.
Take one more. You got Dr. Tesfaye Mahari.
That's fine, Dr. Tesfaye Mahari. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, Tesfaye
Okay.
Mahari. Yeah, okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for all the speakers. And my comment would be directed to Ambassador Haile Menkerios. The comment goes into, on your presentation, you seem to say the character of Isaias defined the organization, that character of defiance. Therefore, wouldn't this also define your whole generation rather than just Isaias? I mean, is it only fair to say it's only Isaias who felt betrayed, and therefore the only solution was to confront the world, the Eritrean anger? Would your generation, or has your generation also shared this anger, and the consequence of that was Isaias's behavior in the way he did, in looking for solution by confrontation? And the second point on that is, in your presentation, you said almost, yes, it's true, Eritrea has fought with all its neighbors, but is this blame for 100% the came from Eritrea's side? Wouldn't there be, for example, which ones do you think Isaias shouldn't have confronted? Because all the issues that have been raised, some of them, in fact, Eritrea was the aggressor was the outside party rather than Eritrea. So which parts do you think are unjustified to be confronted? And the last point is a comment to say on the Eritrean constitution, you raised, you rightly said the transitional constitution gave Isaias to be the head of the parliament as well as the executive. But my comment therefore on that would be, it would be only fair to acknowledge that you guys, or your generation, has corrected this in the new constitution. The 1997 clearly states that the head of the head of the executive is not the head of the parliament, and therefore there is a clear separation, which therefore means the constitution, if implemented, will give us a good chance of having a more balanced political system. I thank you.
So we'll take Ambassador Hebret's question, and then we will give you the floor to answer, and then we will let you go, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay, my question is regarding the 2018 agreement between Abiy and Isaias. Does anybody know what the content of that agreement is? Does anybody think also it may be connected to the reason why the international community, Abiy and everybody is not daring to ask?
I am sorry, Hebret, I cannot hear very well.
My question is regarding the agreement between Isaias, the 2018 agreement between Isaias and Abiy. So, does anybody know what the content of that agreement is? Can we say that this could be connected to why the international community, Abiy, do not dare to ask him to get out by name, because they are just in external process? And can Eritrean people ask for the disclosure of this agreement?
Which agreement? The 2018 agreement between Abiy and Isaias?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Can I now answer?
Yes, please. Yes,
Yeah,
please.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay. I am very sorry. I did not quite catch the question of the sister who asked first, but I think she was mentioning, if I am correct, or if not, correct me, why did you not inform what was going on with the government, with Isaias, to the public, to the Eritrean people, to the parliament, or whatever institutions? Why did you just tell him and not inform others? If that is the case, she is absolutely right. All of us, Isaias does not like actually being, he will consider confronting, in fact. He responded, if he was going to respond, when you talk to him personally, individually. You are right. We should have known soon enough that talking like that doesn't work. We should have been openly actually discussing. Of course, you know what would happen if we were openly bringing those kinds of issues publicly. You remember what happened when people started bringing them publicly, when we started talking openly in the parliament, and some of those from the so-called G15 started talking publicly. You do know what happened. That is what would have happened even earlier. Still, I agree with you. I agree with you. We were not bold enough. Perhaps we did not consider it would serve. We were all also hoping for the constitution to be drafted, and once that is drafted, we have our constitution, we have our elections, then we will have institutions where actually we will challenge. And it is not because it's not told, but Adhanom, for example, asked him in the parliament, what is our budget, by the way? What is the budget of the Eritrean government? It's supposed to be a parliament. It's supposed to know the budget, income and budget of the country. He said, why is this question being asked? And you can imagine some of the generals that were there, members of the parliament, said, why are you asking? This is the way we work throughout, this is all we know. Why is it being asked now? Adhanom, poor Adhanom, actually. And we did not even defend Adhanom. It was the right question to ask because we knew exactly what would happen if we were to confront Isaias. So that was an apt criticism. You're absolutely right. Did the opposition war, the wars that Eritrea was having with all its neighbors, were they all Eritrea's fault? Were they all Isaias's fault? No. There were conflicts. There are always conflicts facing a government. It is the way, the method that government chooses to adopt in order to address them that is a question here. Isaias believes in confrontation as a means of resolving conflicts. That's what I said. I never said there were no conflicts. There were no issues to address. It is the method they were addressed through confrontation. And I think that that answers that question. Another one was the constitution, if implemented, would adequately address the issue. For example, the president being the president of the government and the parliament. Yes, it would. If it was implemented, it would. And now we have the option of either saying, okay, what we will do anyway, what we can't do right now, the study we're doing, is what would be the possible thing to do, the necessary thing to do to return back Eritrea back into a democratic process and it's a transition. We would go through a transition until it was possible to organize free and fair elections in the country, and the constitution is ratified in one way or another, or a new one drafted in whatever way there would be, it is a transitional arrangement. It's for the transition we are preparing, I guess. Or whatever would come afterwards, we will have during that transition processes of discussion, processes of negotiating actually, and elections when a new government would be established. So what do we do for the transition is what we are talking about. So we talk about processes rather than final, in other words, and constitution will come when there is enough agreement on how to continue. The 2080 agreement between Abiy and Isaias has never been disclosed. We do not know what the content of that was. But it was obvious, I think one thing was obvious, that it was not actually, if it was something that they wanted it to be open, they would have been open about it. They did not, and therefore they did not disclose it. We can only guess what it must have been. The real content must have been the consequences we saw afterwards. Immediately they started a war against the TPLF, both of them. And therefore, this definitely must have been one of them. Now, in just a few days ago in Beleza, and Isaias had organized a meeting of the generals in Eritrea. And what he is supposed to have told them, what we hear, is that now that the TPLF is finished, our next project is to start implementation of the tripartite agreement we had started between Ethiopia, Somalia, and Eritrea, and therefore we will be forming a joint force for the protection of this region, and the base would be in Assab, Ethiopia taking care of Air Force, Eritrea taking responsibility for the ground forces, and Somalia for this didn't just come, he didn't just announce that alone on his own. We do not know what the agreements, the two of them have done. We hear, for example, don't worry about the port. What does that mean? Abiy has been saying recently, openly, actually with some of his friends, that the dam was an Meles project. My project is to make sure that Ethiopia would have independent access to the sea. This is what he's saying. So we are just trying to put together what must have been the agreement by the consequences we are saying, but we don't know. We do not. I think the best thing would be a shortcut, that we can allow such a dictatorship really to continue in Eritrea, nor would anything that he would do contrary to the decision of the Eritrean people for full independence of Eritrea hold.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Ambassador.
hope I've answered.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I think we can let you go now.
Got 3 people.
Thank you.
Yeah.